Welcome back, dear friends, to another episode of a podcast about Jesus, the podcast where we speak about Jesus. My name is Johan Breaso, and I'm here with my brother, Paulus Eliasson.
Hello, hello.
Hello. And today we are tackling yet another argument for the existence of God, this one called the Cosmological Argument. And it is...
And when you say yet another, you mean the first one?
I might have gotten my schedules mixed up. Yes, I'll not fight you on this. However, I find it somewhat pedantic that you had to bring this up and we couldn't just move on.
No, I'm sorry. Move on.
So today, for the first time ever, we are tackling an argument for the existence of God, which we may or may not have also done in Norwegian on our other podcast. And we are talking specifically about the one called the Cosmological Argument, which immediately is a very grandiose name that sort of incurs a lot of powerful thoughts and feelings. The cosmological, it's something grand, something big, something extraordinary even.
Yeah, and what this argument does is that it does look at the cosmos, the universe, everything that is time and matter and space, time, matter and space, and asks how did it come to exist? And this is a question that, of course, people have been asking for a very long time. And so we have to go back to the earliest Greek philosopher, not the earliest Greek philosophers, but maybe the most well-known of them, like Aristotle, who made the argument for the existence of a generic God from this fact that everything has to have a beginning. And then we have philosophers, Christian philosophers like Thomas Aquinas and Gottfried Leibniz during the Middle Ages, who expanded on this cosmological argument for God. We also have, earlier than that, we have Muslim theologians who have raised this, Al-Ghazali and others, who have formulated the cosmological argument for God. And in our time, our day and age, the most well-known proponent for the cosmological argument is William Lane Craig, the American Christian philosopher. And he has formulated what is called the Kalam cosmological argument. And the reason why it's called the Kalam is precisely because it was formulated by these Muslim theologians in the beginning, where kalam means reasoning, or it's an expression that is was used in the medieval time by. Did I say Middle Ages before? I meant medieval times.
You might have.
I might have. Yeah. So, but in the early medieval time, when the Muslim philosophers were very prominent, they had this thing called kalam, where you would reason, where you would debate questions, and so that's why it's called the kalam cosmological argument.
And I've heard people argue that because this has a Muslim origin, Christians shouldn't be using it. It's almost like because something comes from Muslims, it sort of raises our hackles and we don't want to be involved with that. And I've heard people out of pocket dismiss this argument only because it was based on something that a Muslim once did. And I think that's silly, to be honest.
It's silly on so many levels. Shouldn't we use Arabic numbers because it comes from the Arab culture? I don't know. If it's a good argument, it's a good argument, and we are by no way of saying it. We are not Muslims, and we don't agree with them on so many points. But Muslims are monotheists. and this is a monotheistic argument, or it's an argument for a monotheistic God.
And to be entirely transparent, we are not saying that the cosmological argument makes the case for the Christian God. This makes the case for a God, and to later define which God that is, of course, falls to the Christian person to do with the gospel, with what we believe in. But many atheists especially, or many agnostics even that are uncertain, they find just the concept of a God, not even the Christian God, to be so absurd and incohesive that they cannot believe. There's a blockage between them and faith. And so what we're trying to do is dismantle that blockage to have some acceptance that there might be a God, or that there has to be a God even, and we will then move on to argue why this has to be the Christian God.
Yeah, and of course there are a lot of questions that are raised even now, and I believe if we have an atheist listening to this podcast, I hope so, and very welcome. I know that there are a lot of questions and counter arguments arising already, but please be patient. We will try to come to all of those. We will present the argument. We will try to defend the premises. And then we will also talk about some common counter arguments to this argument.
And speaking of being patient, we waffled on now for 7 minutes. So let's actually get into the argument itself. And the argument looks like this. It is based on two premises that leads to a conclusion. And premise one is that everything that begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2 says that the universe began to exist, and premise 3 says, therefore, the universe has a cause. That wasn't the premise, that was the conclusion.
Yes, exactly. So it's quite simple. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. Of course, that doesn't even mention God, and that doesn't mean that the cause has to be God. But we will also show, I hope, that this cause, whatever the cause is, or whoever the cause is, this cause must be, first of all, uncreated. It must be timeless. It must be non-material. It must be incredibly powerful, and it must be personal. So that is the argument. That is what we will try to defend.
And let's get right to it, because I feel like I can hear the keyboards clacking away already, especially at that last one, personal. That's a hot topic if I've ever seen one. But let's start by defining the premises. What do we mean by the universe? And you mentioned it before at the start.
Yeah. So what we mean by the universe here is all time, all space, and all matter. So all the things, if you want to expand it to a multiverse, that would be what we mean by it. If you would say that there are parallel universes, that there is something more than what the eye can see, or what we have in our universe, that is included in it. So when we say everything that begins to exist has a cause, the universe, that is time, space, and matter, began to exist, so it must have a cause.
Well, that's the second thing I want to dive into, though, because does everything need to have a cause? That's a wide claim. Anytime you use the word everything, I feel like you have to have some backing for the claim.
Yeah, and I don't think that everything has to have a cause. I think that things can exist either necessarily because they have to exist, or they can exist contingently because something caused it to exist. But what we are claiming here is not that everything has a cause. That would be, then we would also have to say that the creator would have a cause, and it would be an infinite regress of causes. So what we are saying is that everything that begins to exist has a cause. So whatever began to exist, I began to exist at some point, and my cause are my parents, and their cause is their parents. And we could talk about different kind of causes, like material causes and so on. But anyhow, anything that begins to exist in some sense has a cause.
But does it though? Isn't there like talks about quantum physics and subatomic particles that kind of just they just are. They don't really have a cause. They don't have any rhyme or reason to their existence.
I mean, the smallest particles that we know of are the so-called subatomic particles, the quarks and so on. And you could say that these are the building blocks of everything that exists, and they don't change or they don't come into existence or go out of existence. But it's not only, we're not only talking about a material cause. We're saying, because if I would see that a dog or a horse just popped into existence, I wouldn't say like, oh, that came there without a cause because the subatomic particles already existed. I would say we need an explanation for that thing that began to exist. So, and I don't think that we can just make an exception for either for subatomic particles and say that, no, they don't need a reason for their existence. They are exempted from that. I think we need to find a cause for everything that we can see that has begun to exist. And as far as we know, even subatomic particles began to exist.
Yeah, because they are, and everything that is needs to have been, if that makes any sense whatsoever.
Yeah, it needs to have its origin either in its necessity or in its contingency. So that's the point, and nothing can exist outside of those two things. Either it exists by necessity or by contingency. So, yeah.
Well, the second premise of this argument, that the universe began to exist, that is also a massive claim. And of course, when we're dealing with a cosmological argument, we're bound to make some massive claims. But do we actually know that the universe began to exist? I'm pretty sure that there are people out there that believe that, no, the universe is just this infinite amount of space and time that has always been and will always continue to be.
I think that if you would go back like 100 years in time, there would be a much larger amount of people who would say that, who would claim that what we have here in the universe is something that has always existed. I've heard old philosophers and scientists saying that the universe is just a brute fact. It just exists and it has always done so. We don't see any beginning. It's just here, which has philosophical problems, but it also has problems with what we have observed. Because if you go back to the beginning of the 20th century, you have the Belgian priest Georges Lemaitre, who is known for his theory called the Big Bang theory. He was talking about the primordial atom, the first atom where it all started. And he formed a theory that we now call the Big Bang theory, the big expansion, like everything started at one point and then it expanded from there.
And I have to say, Paulus, well done on the pronunciation of that name there. I would never endeavor to try the French. I'll take a much easier name in English, who is the man named Edwin Hubble, who proved that galaxies are moving away from each other. Everything is moving away. There's more and more distance being gained. Mm-hmm. And if the universe is expanding, naturally something must have set it in motion. Things don't just move on their own. If stuff is moving away from each other over time, if we move backwards in time, things must necessarily move towards each other.
Yeah, exactly. And that has also been observed coincidentally by the Hubble telescope, which is named after Edwin Hubble. And
he did not create it.
No, he did not.
I did not make that mistake in an outtake to say that he created the telescope.
It has been cut out. Don't worry. No. So what has been observed and what has been concluded is that, as far as we know, our best theory by now what the scientists would say is that the universe is around 13.7 billion years old. That's our best theory by now. But what we can say with even greater certainty is that it began to exist.
But let's say, because that certainly seems to point towards there being a beginning, a point of creation, or a first time where it all began moving out from. But let's say that the universe oscillates, so it's expanding and then shrinking and expanding and shrinking, never reaching that point of the Big Bang. Why couldn't the universe just be infinitely old?
Well, there are some reasons why it couldn't. The oscillating model has been disproven by observation, because we know that at least as our universe is moving, there is nothing that indicates that there is any force that would shrink it together again, or so that it would be oscillating. It would need to be in another construction, in another proportion between matter and space and so on for it to work. But anyhow, so there are a lot of other models that are thought to maybe work. But even like philosophically or metaphysically, we could say that it cannot be infinitely old, because there would be some paradoxes, like what is called the Hilbert Hotel. The popular paradox of infinity, and you're working with this hotel and you're trying to fill up all the rooms and so on, and you can use this model to talk about time as well. And you would see that if we have an infinite amount of time, of days or years or whatever in the past, we would actually never reach today, because it would have to go on for infinity for us to even come to today. So it's actually a metaphysical impossibility for there to be an unlimited amount of time behind us.
You could never add to nor subtract anything from infinity. Infinity is a constant state, and clearly time is not constant. Time is moving, and that wouldn't be feasible in an infinite universe.
No, and I think that anyhow, how you look upon it, the infinity part of it creates many more questions and problems than it solves. So you have to swallow a lot of camels for that to go down. I don't know if that's the image that I want to use, but what I want to say is that there are a few different models, but most have been disproven, and they are hypotheses that have not been proven. And by all means, if you who are listening to this think that you have a model that would disprove what we are talking about here, please just send us an email at post@omjesus, that is omjesus.no. And that's our current email. So just send whatever counter arguments you find, and if you have complaints about what we have said, and some of the things that we have said and formulated, if it be wrong, it may be due to the fact that we are not native English speakers. So just keep that in mind. But we're trying our best, and we will go on and we will see what this cause is, because we would say that the universe began to exist. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, and therefore the universe has a cause. And that's where you were worried that we were saying things that might be a little bit controversial, right?
Yeah. Well, let's run through it, because this cause needs to have certain properties or attributes to be the cause of the creation or the beginning of space and time. Namely, that it needs to be without space and without time. And let's tackle those first. It needs to be timeless and immaterial. Because naturally, if it created the concepts of time and space, it itself cannot have already existed within time and space.
No, since time began at the beginning of the universe, and that's, as far as we know, is the truth. It began at the beginning of the universe. Then it needs to be timeless. The cause needs to be timeless. It cannot be bound by the thing that it creates. And it also needs to be immaterial, because the universe is all the matter. So it cannot be bound by the thing that it creates again. So it's timeless, it's immaterial, and it needs to be not created. You will hear this who created God argument. Yeah, if you say that everything that exists has a cause, then who created God? But we're not saying that everything that exists has a cause. So it needs to be uncreated, timeless, and immaterial. And of course, it also needs to be incredibly powerful.
That one kind of goes without saying.
Yeah.
It's something that has the potency to create literally everything, needs to have an enormous amount of power in and of itself.
Yeah. So we're something uncreated, timeless, immaterial, incredibly powerful, and then we come to this controversial part of it. It needs to be personal.
And I'll admit, when I first heard the Kalam cosmological argument, this is the part that kind of felt iffy to me. I felt like we're inserting something that points truly towards God here. That does it really need to be there? But it's not about God being personal at all. It's literally about overcoming the issue of infinity through reason.
Yeah, and it also has to do with what could be uncreated and abstract. So the only things that we know of that could be uncreated, and I'm not saying that they are uncreated, because I think that God is the only one who is uncreated, existing necessarily. But the only thing that we know that could be existing necessarily are, beside from the concept of God, that's abstract objects like numbers or propositions, statements. So a proposition can exist necessarily, but numbers and propositions cannot cause anything. So it needs to be something that can cause something.
The universe did not begin to exist because 7, 8, 9. That's not how it works. These things, while they may be existent in an abstract mind world, they don't have any power. They cannot do anything.
No. So what we are left with is an energy, like an impersonal force. The problem here, as you stated, is that if it's an energy, then whatever that energy causes, like if we're thinking of a necessary battery, immaterial, timeless, uncreated, incredibly powerful battery, then what it causes, it must also cause necessarily. If it doesn't have any will, if it doesn't have any intentions, or if it cannot choose to do one thing or the other, then it would be because if it would cause necessarily, then it would also cause from eternity, and then we are back at the problem that we had before with the infinite regress of events. So then the universe would be eternal, and because the cause is eternal and is just doing what it necessarily will do. So what we come back to is that we need this personal actor, the personal being, because it needs to be able to choose. I want to create now, or I do not want to create now. Although when we talk about now, we are talking about what the philosophers call, I think they call it sans temp. They are not talking about like before time, because there is nothing before to have before, but they're talking about without time or outside of time. So I think they use this French sans, which means without.
You're really into the French today.
Yeah.
So it does seem that this entity really needs to be personal. Like, it needs to have the will and the ability to choose when to perform the act of creation. It itself needs to be not created, otherwise we're just in this infinite regress of statements that everything is created by everything, and so on and so forth. Like, something needs to have just exist because it must. It needs to be outside of time and space because it created time and space, therefore it cannot have been within it. And it needs to be incredibly powerful, something that is nigh on omnipotent.
Yeah,
and that to me is starting to sound a lot like what we Christians call God.
exactly. And if I'm allowed to be a little bit of pastor before we go on to the counter arguments, I would say that the first verse of the Bible, interestingly enough, it has some of these elements that we have been talking about. It says, in the beginning, that is time, God created, that is the cause, the heavens, that is space, and the earth, that is matter. So we have time, space, and matter, and we have the cause for the time, space, and matter already in the first verse of the Bible.
And with the word beginning, we also have an implication of time.
Yeah, exactly. It has a beginning. So what the Bible has been saying for thousands of years, we have confirmed in our day and age with the Hubble telescope and the best scientific theories that we have today.
And I would say the most common counter-argument to this, and something that we've touched on already by saying that this initial cause needs to be not created, is people will, if we say that, well, God created the heavens and the earth, people will ask, well, then who created God?
Yes. And what we are saying then is, as I said before, it's not that everything that exists has a cause, it's that everything that began to exist, everything that begins to exist has a cause. And that may sound like an ad hoc claim, like we're making a special place for God and say, he exactly this one, he doesn't need it, but everything else needs it. But as I said, everything that exists needs to exist either by necessity or as a or it needs to have a cause for its existence. And I found that the Muslim philosopher Avicenna described this very well. If someone wants to have a good argument for the necessity of God's existence, I would search for Avicenna. And there is a podcast that has been going on for a few years now called The History of Philosophy Without Any Gaps. And there is one episode there called By All Means Necessary that talks about Avicenna and his argument for God. And I would say that, I don't know when this came out and I don't remember when I heard it, but when I first heard it, that was the first time that I realized, but this is a really, really good argument, the one that he makes there. And the counter arguments that the host of that podcast show gave, I was like, that's not a good argument, and that's not a good argument either. So I had to look closer into that, and I think that is about the time that I got very interested in these arguments for the existence of God.
Unfortunately, I think we can just pack up and end the podcast here and just conclude that we were wrong, because there is a force that is nigh on magic, and it's called quantum physics.
Yeah.
And with it, anything and everything is possible, and nothing can be neither denied nor proven.
Yeah, and if you think that you know quantum physics, then you don't know quantum physics, and because of quantum physics,
Essentially.
we can turn around time, and we can causes don't need to have things don't need to have causes, and especially if you go back to the beginning of the universe, then we can reverse time, and things can cause themselves. The more I listen to, and I by no means try to say that I understand quantum physics, because I don't, and neither do you, and neither does any one of those who listen to this podcast. But when that being said, I would say that what I hear a lot of is what I call quantum physics of the gaps. Because we are often accused of using God of the gaps. Like when something cannot be explained, then we say, "Oh, that must be God." So we have this gap in our understanding, and we put God there. But and that might be right or it might be wrong. I hope that is wrong. And what we are doing here is that we are arguing for what is the best explanation for what the cause of the universe is. We're not saying, "Oh, we don't know what the cause is, so let's put God there." But what I feel that many times people do, and especially those who don't know very much about quantum physics, is that they say they put quantum physics where they cannot explain things. Like, so the universe needs to have a beginning. No, it doesn't, because quantum physics. And that's just not a good enough explanation. And when I hear those things, I need them to explain to me exactly what do you mean by that, and that's usually the end of that part of the discussion, at least.
Yeah, because it's like it's an appeal to something that cannot be explained by the layman. And if we went to a professional who actually deals with this, don't think they would say that, well, no, this doesn't actually prove anything of what you're arguing.
No, and yeah, so and again, if you think, you who are listening, think that you have heard a very, very good argument from how quantum physics can explain how we don't need any God for creation, please send us a message, and we will try to answer, and we will try to engage with that honestly.
I would like an accredited thesis attached to the mail, though, so
Yeah.
that we can deal with this with actual, with not with hearsay, but with actual facts written by professionals.
Yeah, yeah, preferably. But there is one other thing that is almost as popular as saying, "What about quantum physics?" And that is, "What about the multiverse?"
Ah,
So we say that, yeah, but our universe could have started by a multiverse. The multiverse could be the reason that our universe exists. So there is another universe, like a mother universe, that creates other universes, and then we don't have to explain. So that universe could have started our universe, which is true, unprovable by all accounts, but it could be true. On the other hand, how we define the universe kind of covers for this, because we say all time, all matter, and all space. So if this universe exists, it needs to occupy some space, it needs some time, it needs all of these things, and you just kind of move the problem one step further back.
mm-hmm.
So I'm not very impressed by the multiverse argument. So it's more of an argument against the teleological evidence or argument for the existence of God, which we will come back to given time and space. I almost said, but
If we can get to creating, if we can get to causing it, it'll exist.
Yeah, exactly. So, and if it exists, you will know that we are the cause of it. But there is also, and we said this in the beginning, the argument, but that doesn't mean, all of these things that we have said doesn't mean that it's the Christian God who is the cause of everything, right? So can we be sure that this is the Christian God that we're talking about? And the answer for that is no.
Looking at the cosmological argument in isolation, it does not point towards our God, towards the Christian God.
It points to him, but it it's like it also points to some other gods. So you could say that this is a general. It could be a deistic god where there is a creator god who just then disappears and doesn't do anything else. It could be a general theistic god like some of the gods of the monotheistic religions. It needs to be like the ultimate cause. It cannot be anyone beside him. It cannot be a multitude of gods or polytheistic idea. It needs to be an ultimate God. And I refer you again to Avicenna's wonderful argument for the necessity of one ultimate being and not two or more. But if we assume that this argument is true, or if we are convinced by the argument that it's true, then there are a very limited number of religions that talk about this, that adhere to one creator of the universe. And we could all be wrong, the Christianity and Islam and Jewish religion and everything. We could all be wrong, but probability suggests that at least one of them is correct. So there are the big three: Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, and also Sikhism is a monotheistic religion, and there are a few others, but these are absolutely the biggest ones, and the ones that I would want our listeners to consider when they consider this argument and what this might mean for them.
And we will eagerly argue that we have a multitude of reasons why we believe the Christian God, the God of the Bible, to be the one that fits all of these criteria, and also to be the superior God to any other religious claims like Islam or Sikhism. But it's not contained within this cosmological argument, and it's not contained within this episode of the podcast. That, however, does not mean it is not true.
No, exactly. So let's look at this. Do some final thoughts about this.
Yeah, let's begin to wrap it up.
I would say that one of the questions that we need to answer is this a good argument? And I would say that this is probably one of the absolutely best. First of all, the logic is impeccable.
It is like stunningly simple.
Yeah,
it feels almost too simple to be true. There's two premises and a conclusion, and it's not even wordy. It's not even far-fetched. It's so easy.
Yeah. So the logic, and some people will say this is not logical, and they usually don't know what we mean when we say that something is logical, because something can be logical and false. So the question is if the premises are true. But if the premises are true, then the conclusion follows necessarily. That's what we mean by a logical argument. So, and I would say, secondly, that the premises here, that the universe began to exist and that everything that begins to exist has a cause, the premises are most likely true. And if you can disprove the premises, then it doesn't disprove the existence of God. So it's not like everything we believe hinges upon this argument. Not at all.
No, not at all.
But it is one of the arguments, and it's a really, really good one.
But is it practical? Like, we have a good argument, but how useful would you say that this becomes in real life situation? Like, for a Christian person, if we were to teach ourselves this argument and the most common reasonings behind it, is it practical? Like, can we use this in evangelism?
I think that is kind of intuitive, although it does involve a lot of Edwin Hubble and Georges Lemaitre and all of these persons, and a little bit of quantum physics and Hilbert's Hotel and so on. It is also kind of intuitive, like everything that we see needs to have a cause. Yeah, that makes sense. I think that even people who are not like well versed in these kind of arguments would have some idea and understanding of what it means. I have explained this to children, not very young, but say teenagers and so on, and they're like, yeah, that makes sense, and they have counter arguments and they have good questions and so on. I have used this as an argument in evangelism when I'm talking to people and they try to say that no, the science proves that there is no God, and I would say no, it kind of does the opposite. It proves that there is a God. So I would say that it's a very good idea to have this argument in your arsenal, because many times people will say there is no evidence that God exists. There is no argument for this. You cannot prove that God exists, and I would disagree. I would say that you cannot prove it to the point where it cannot be argued against, but at the same time you can prove it to the satisfaction of a logical mind and say that, yeah, this absolutely makes sense.
It counters that ever-present, like, there is no evidence that God exists.
Mm-hmm.
It really does. It like, people who say, well, there's none, nil whatsoever, it is an absurd claim. Well, here's one.
Yeah.
Let's deal with this. Let's talk about this. Let's go back and forth on this. But you can't claim. I'm literally giving you an argument. I'm giving you evidence. You can't ignore this.
No, and it is evidently logical, and the premises are most likely true. The modern science says that this is the way that things are, and if you want to argue against it, you need to have good reasons to argue against it, and you need some good help of science that I'm not aware of. But there is also, like, the question, so where do we go from here? What do we do with this argument once we have like convinced someone, oh, okay, I believe now that there is a God, but that doesn't mean that I believe in you. Because the Christian faith is not about believing that God exists, although that is a very, very big step, because if it does, then some things will logically follow. So walking from a God to God,
the God,
the God of the Bible is an important step. But I think that if you have taken the first step, then the second step is not that very, very long. So you can know. So faith is not about believing that God exists. Like, I have faith in something means that there is a bridge there. I know that it is there, but to walk on it, I must believe that it will not crumble. So if you want to get to the other side, which in our belief is to come to Jesus, to be saved and so on, you must believe in God. More than believing that he exists, you must have faith in God and start to act upon that faith. So that is where we want people to come. But this argument, I think, is a good part of that road.
It is a phenomenal seed that can grow and flourish into proper faith. That is for sure.
And if someone would agree with this argument and say, no, but I don't believe in the Christian God, then I would just ask them, so where does this argument lead you then? So we can take it from there.
Well, let's present the argument one last time before we round off this podcast. And the argument goes like this, that premise 1, everything that begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2, the universe began to exist, and the conclusion therefore is that the universe has a cause.
Yeah, and that cause needs to be uncreated, timeless, non-material, incredibly powerful, and also, surprisingly enough, personal. And that is what we call God. So this is an argument for God.
If you found this podcast interesting, and I hope you have, because I, at the very least, think this is a fascinating subject and something I could talk about endlessly, to be honest. It is so intriguing to look at how logical faith is, and how this idea that, Christianity is contrary to science and to logic, it's a silly thought, to be honest. But if you want to talk with us about this, you can write to us. And Paulus already mentioned the email earlier.
Post at omjesus, O-M-Jesus, that is about Jesus in Norwegian, omjesus.no.
And you can also check out our website.
That is omjesus.no.
To look at videos, articles, and find this podcast. And there you can probably find the email address as well if the spelling gets a little bit difficult. And with that, we're going to round off this episode. Thank you for listening, and we hope to see you again in the next one. Until then, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.